What's up everybody, Jeff here, and a lot of miniatures companies often put out alternative models or special edition models that are only available for a limited time and then become extremely expensive to buy on places like eBay or Facebook Marketplace. Now, as a collector, I find that a little bit irritating because it can be really hard to get your hands on some of those models. But at the same time, some of my favorite models in my collection are special edition or alt versions. And at least anecdotally, they definitely seem like they're the type of things that are very popular among players and fans. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about some of the things that make a good special edition model and some of the different ways that different companies handle these types of things. Now, note, I'm going to be talking mostly about the companies that I'm a little bit more familiar with, but I know a lot of other companies out there do these types of things. So if you have a favorite example or a particular way that you like that a company handles this type of thing, then get down in the comments and let us know. So one of the things that I wanted to note is that there's an issue that comes up with a lot of the games that we play, especially some of the smaller games, where the company wants to put out more new models every year because it's the way that they make money and it kind of keeps the game going and it keeps people interested. But it also adds a lot of bloat to the game. Sometimes it can feel like too many releases make things a little bit too complicated, and you have things like power creep where things get too powerful and some of the old stuff becomes irrelevant. And all of this stuff can really make it hard for new people to get into the game, or for folks who are a little bit more casual to kind of keep their interest and stay competitive. And one of the ways that companies can actually avoid that while still putting out new releases is by doing these alt models or these special editions. Especially if they're the type of thing that doesn't actually add any new rules or mechanics to the game. If it's just a special edition of an existing model, then it can kind of continue the revenue stream. It can allow them to put out new releases without adding to the overall bloat or complexity of the game. And I even did a video a while back with my buddy Deck from Corner Case talking about our favorite special edition or nightmare edition models that Weird has put out from Alpha, because they do some particularly interesting stuff with those models. But that gets me to the first point here, which is what makes for a good alternative or special edition model. The first type of special edition that you might be familiar with would be something that is just an alternative pose for an existing model that looks otherwise exactly the same. It's just in a new configuration. Maybe it looks particularly heroic, or it's got an action pose, or maybe they just add a tactile rock to the base. But either way, I think this is a pretty cool option, and it's kind of the standard or default way that you do an alternate model. A lot of different companies do this type of thing, and in particular, I guess in Malifaux in first edition, they put out a few alternative sculpts for some of the masters in the game, and they were just a slightly more interesting version of the same character. The art looked basically the same, it was just a different configuration or a different pose. And overall, I think for the most part, the special edition models were improvements over the existing models. But I like this option because it's just a way to show off that you have the special version of the model. It can make you feel a little bit more ownership over the model, especially if you painted it yourself. But it doesn't add any new mechanics to the game, and it doesn't actually mean that anybody is missing out if they don't get a chance to get their hands on this model, at least as far as the game is concerned. There's not going to be any special rules or anything that they're missing out on in gameplay terms. It's just a sort of cooler pose that you can get your hands on and be proud of the fact that you have this special version. And it's nice because if you're a new player who missed out on getting that alternate model, then you don't have to worry about missing out on actual gameplay or mechanics in the game. It's just the aesthetics of the model that are going to be different. Now, another thing that some companies do is put out alternate versions of models with different weapon loadouts. And obviously that's not the type of thing that matters in every game, because in some games the model is the model no matter what they're carrying. But in particular in Corvus Belli's Infinity, they sometimes put out alternative versions of models with different weapons or different equipment. Most unit profiles have multiple different options, and in some cases it can be upwards of 8 or 9 options. And they'll have different guns and different melee weapons and different other equipment that they can use in the game. So when they release a model, sometimes there will be a variety of different options to match those different unit profiles, but they don't always release one for every profile that's available in the game. Now, obviously in the case of a model where there's 8 or 9 different loadouts, it's not really feasible for them to put out 8 or 9 variants of the model, but in some cases they actually put out special editions that have a loadout that is not otherwise available. Now, I know in my experience in the Infinity community, things like proxying are pretty common, and it's pretty universally accepted that that is a legitimate way to play the game. So if you do want to play with a different weapon loadout for a particular model, as long as it's the right model, you can kind of just indicate that to your opponent before you play the game, and usually it's no problem. But the collector in me kind of wants all of my models to be what you see is what you get. So it ends up being a circumstance where I want to try to track down all of the alternative models so that I can have the right weapons in the hands of the models that I'm playing on the table. So all that said, I do imagine that there are some folks out there who would be annoyed if there's a particular unit profile that they like to run in the game, and that model was available at one point, but it was a limited release, so they can't actually get their hands on it, and now they have to proxy or pay $50 for the model on eBay. And in some cases, Corvus Belli will actually re-release the same model with the same loadout, in spite of the fact that there are other profiles that they've never released before. And I'm not really sure why they would do something like that, but maybe there's a reason for it that I'm just not aware of. Now, a third type of alternative model that you might see would be a model that looks like an entirely different character and it just counts as the existing model in the game. So a good example of this would be Weird's Nightmare and Rotten Harvest boxes, where you get a set of models that are totally different looking. They might be entirely different characters, and they might even exist in the lore otherwise. But in terms of the rules, they are official proxies for an existing crew that's already in the game. Now, this is an interesting option to me because Weird has done some really cool stuff with their Nightmare and Rotten Harvest and the Mist models. And it seems like it's a good opportunity for companies to kind of spread their wings and do some more interesting and more creative stuff that we might not have otherwise seen come to the game. Honestly, some of my favorite models that they've ever done and some of my favorite models in my collection are their Nightmare and Mist models. But there is a problem that I have with doing it this way. And that is that it can be a little bit confusing for your opponent when you're playing with these types of alternative models that look nothing like the regular models. It can definitely be hard for newer or more casual players when they're playing games like this because not only do you have to learn your own crew and what all of your own models do, but you have to try to be a little bit familiar with what your opponent is playing so that you know how to play against them. And when your opponent is playing a crew that looks nothing like the normal default version of the crew, it can be a little bit confusing and harder to keep up with what exactly they have on their side of the table and what their capabilities are. So, for example, I've actually never played a game of Malifaux against a normal Hamlin crew, but I have played a whole bunch of games against the alternative version of Hamlin's crew, which is the Crazy Cat Lady set. And that's a pretty interesting set, but unfortunately, even though I've played against it a handful of times, I still can't really keep track of which model represents which of the normal Hamlin models in game. They all kind of look similar to me, and even though I've played a handful of games, I'm still like lost as to which one counts as which. Now, if you're a more veteran player, then maybe this is something that's not an issue for you. It could be pretty easy to just kind of go through and familiarize yourself with which model counts as which model. But if you're newer and you've been just kind of looking over your opponent's models on the app or you've been reviewing some of the rules on the website, then it can definitely be pretty confusing to see this crew on the other side that looks nothing like the existing crew. So if you don't play Malifaux and you're not familiar with this type of thing, but you're an Infinity player, then imagine sitting down for a game of Infinity and your opponent is using proxy models for their entire list, using models from an entirely different game. I guess to be fair, maybe it's half of the list, but still, you get the point. It can be pretty confusing. Now, in some cases with these alternative models, the special versions of the models are close enough to the existing models that it's pretty easy to figure out which is which, and it's not quite as confusing when you're playing against it, but with a lot of them, it's so different that it's super duper hard to have any idea what's going on unless you sit there and really memorize which model counts as which existing model. But I'll be curious what all of you think. Get down in the comments below and let me know if you've ever played against an alternative model or a proxy of a model, and it actually made it very hard for you to keep track of what your opponent was playing or which model was which. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of any Infinity alternative models that would be confusing or hard to identify, because they tend to just be different poses and different loadouts. But I'm not 100% sure about that, so if there is something like that, then let me know that as well. Now, the last option here, and I think it's probably the worst option, is a special model that gets its own unique rules in the game. And the reason that I say that this is the worst option is because now you're actually taking away from people's options in terms of the gameplay and what they may want to play when they're doing their list building. If you didn't get your hands on the special edition limited release, then you pretty much just don't have the option to play that model in the game unless you decide that you're going to proxy or you decide to go on eBay and splurge for a secondhand version of the model. Now, obviously, that's not as big of a deal if you don't mind proxying and just using a different model to represent it. But again, for somebody who is a collector or for somebody who is a little bit more particular about making sure all their stuff is WYSIWYG, then this can be a real feel-bad type of thing for some gamers. So maybe you got into a game a little bit later, or you decide to switch to another faction, and there's an exclusive model that has its own rules, but you can't get your hands on it because you are a little bit late, and now you feel like you're sort of locked out of using that in the game. Now, an example of this off the top of my head would be for Conquest Last Argument of Kings and their Artisan series. This is a particularly unique example because these are actually like artisan crafted, unique sculpts of models, and they're done in resin instead of the normal plastic that the regular range is done in. They only make a specific number of each of these models, and they're a little bit more expensive than the normal models that you might expect to get for Conquest. But unfortunately, at least in some cases that I'm familiar with, the model will actually have unique rules, and the only way to get the official model to go with those rules would be to get your hands on this Artisan Series model. Now, granted, these models are absolutely gorgeous. They're super beautiful models, but in a way that kind of makes the situation a little bit worse if you can't get your hands on one of them and you want it. So, for example, I came to Conquest a little bit late in the game, and there are a few models from my faction that are part of the Artisan Series, and without finding one in the secondhand market and paying a ridiculous amount of money, there's just no way for me to technically play that model without kit bashing something or proxying something. It wouldn't feel so bad to me if it was just a special edition of an existing model and I could just kind of go out and pick up the default version and it would be a little bit less cool. But in this case, they are their own unique models with a separate stat sheet. And there's something that feels a little bit bad about proxying a model for that when I know there is an official one out there that I could be using to represent that model, but I just can't get my hands on it. Now, I'm sure that there's other companies that do things like this that I just can't think of off the top of my head. And I think actually Games Workshop has even done things like this, where they release special models that had their own special rules, at least for a period of time. But that type of information is actually pretty hard to find on the internet, so if you're familiar with something like that, then drop a comment and let me know. This video is sponsored by Firelock Games. They make a whole bunch of different historical games, but right now they're running a Kickstarter for a new skirmish-style game called Port Royal. In this game, you will build a small group of privateers, pirates, corsairs, Native Americans, or Maroons, and go off on adventures collecting loot across Port Royal in Jamaica. It's set right after an earthquake devastated the island, and the game focuses on campaign play with linked scenarios, where you get to progress and upgrade your crew after every fight. It can be played in a player versus player format, or you can play it as a co-op game, or even in a solo mode against an AI. Now, I actually had a chance to get a demo of this game at Adepticon this year, and one of the things that I thought was really interesting about it is the reaction system. So it is I go, you go, meaning that you're going to activate your entire army, but every time you do an action with a model, if your opponent's models can see that model, then they have an opportunity to do something in response. So this means that even while your opponent's going, you still have to be paying attention and making sure that you understand exactly what's going on. And it gives it a little bit of a feel similar to a game like Infinity. But one of the key differences there is that this game takes place in the 1600s, so all these weapons are black powder based, which means that after you take a shot, you are out of ammo and you have to reload. This means that you won't just be indiscriminately taking reaction shots at everything that moves. You have to be very careful and choose when is the right time to shoot and when is the right time to do something else. This gives the game a real tactical feel, which I think is really cool, and there will be a link to the Kickstarter in the description below, so definitely go down there and check it out. But if you're watching this and you're thinking that you don't want to have to wait that long to get into some piratey shenanigans, then you might be in luck. Because Firelock Games is actually sponsoring a giveaway for a 2-player starter set for Blood and Plunder. Now, this is a really awesome set that comes with enough stuff to make 2 starter armies for Blood and Plunder, and that'll give you plenty of stuff to play in Port Royal because all of the models are cross-compatible. Plus, you get Blackbeard himself, as well as Captain Maynard, and 2 ships. It's a really sick box, so if you want to have a chance to win it, then make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, drop a like on the video, and then leave a comment that includes a flame emoji. Then 2 weeks from the day this video posts, I will randomly select a winner out of the people that enter, and you will win the 2-player starter set. Huge thank you to Firelock Games for sponsoring the giveaway, and now let's get back to the video. Now, I think a big factor that determines how I feel about a particular alt model or special edition model is the way that the company distributes them. I think the most straightforward way that the company can release them is just to put them up for regular sale. And for example, that's how Weird does most of their alternative versions, where during particular events that they do throughout the year, they will make available a bunch of their alternative Nightmare, Miss, or Rotten Harvest boxes, and you can just pay money to pick them up like a normal purchase. Now, typically they'll be a little bit more expensive than a comparable normal model, but that's because they're special edition and they're limited and exclusive. But it's nice because as long as you are willing to pay the money, then you can pick the model up as long as it's still available in stock. And I think this is probably the best way to distribute them because it's pretty straightforward and you don't have to jump through any additional hoops. You just buy the model like you would any other model. Now, oftentimes this type of release will be linked to a convention exclusive, which back in the day it used to be pretty common to be limited to showing up at the physical convention to actually get your hands on the model. And that was obviously a big pain in the butt because if you weren't willing to travel, in some cases halfway across the world, then there was no real way to get access to that model. But nowadays, and especially since COVID in particular, it's been pretty popular for companies to put out their special edition event exclusive models on their web stores in addition to being available in person at the conventions. And obviously this is just a much more user-friendly way to do it because if you're not able to actually make it to the convention, then you can still get your hands on the model as long as you buy it within that window. For example, TT Combat has a range of event-exclusive miniatures that they put up on their web store, and they run the gambit through all of their different game systems. So they become available anytime there's a convention going on that TT Combat is involved with, and you can order it through their web store just like you were ordering anything else. Now, at least for them, it seems like this is the type of thing where they continue to produce those models, and they stay available on an ongoing basis, but only within those time windows. As opposed to some companies that produce a limited amount of them, and then once they sell out, they're gone for good. Although I do know that TT Combat does eventually retire those event-exclusive models down the road. But this is pretty cool because it gives you a little bit more breathing room where if you miss a particular sale, there's a good chance that it's going to be available the next time that there is an event going on. Now, another way that companies will release things like this is as a pre-order bonus or as a pack-in when you purchase other products for them. And this is the way that Corvus Belli likes to do it, where if you pre-order a bundle of new products that are coming out for the month, then you'll get the special exclusive miniature to go along with it. Or when you buy things like the comic book or the paint sets, they'll come with a special model along with them. They also sell their ITS tournament packs that come with special models, but that's kind of a separate thing. Now, I think this is an interesting way to do it because, especially if you're a more casual player, then this is something that's just going to come as a special bonus when you're buying something that you were theoretically already going to buy anyway. And they typically bundle in a model that goes with the same sectorial that is relevant to whatever the main purchase is that you're making, so it's going to be something that you're going to be able to use in the game anyway. On the other hand, if you're a more hardcore player or you're a collector, then it can lead to a kind of FOMO situation where if you didn't want to make that original purchase and buy the main product, but you wanted that exclusive miniature, then it can be a little bit harder to get your hands on it. Now, my experience, in most cases, you can actually find those things available secondhand from people who buy the product and don't want the extra model. So I've always kind of been able to get my hands on the ones that I wanted anyway. But I can definitely imagine a situation where you miss that opportunity and then you have no other option but to make this bigger purchase that you didn't really want. Now, oftentimes with Corvus Belli, this special edition model is a limited time thing where you get that model for pre-ordering early, and then eventually they do re-release that particular model. But again, in some cases, like I mentioned before, the new version of the model might have a different weapon loadout, and you still won't be able to get access to that first weapon loadout unless you did get the pre-order bonus. But I do think it would be cool if they would start making sure that those models are always available to be purchased separately, just in case you run into this type of situation where you really want that particular model and not the rest of the stuff. Now, another way that companies will distribute these things, and in this case I'm thinking particularly of Games Workshop, is to tie the special edition model to a service or a subscription. So Games Workshop has their Warhammer Plus service where you get access to their streaming video and use of their app. And as long as you stay subscribed for a certain amount of time, you can pick one of these exclusive models to get your hands on. And they've also done a couple of magazine subscriptions, and those magazines will come with models and hobby equipment and paint. And usually that will include at least one special edition model that you can't get anywhere else. And I don't think it's much of a stretch here to say that this is the worst way to do it, and it gets people kind of upset, understandably so. Now, again, if you're more of a casual player, then this probably isn't really a big deal, and typically these models are the types of things that already have existing versions in the normal product range, so you can get your hands on it and play it in the game without much trouble. But if you're a collector or you're a little bit more hardcore about it, then it can be kind of a pain to have to sign up for this whole service that you may or may not want just to get your hands on this particular model because it's pretty cool or you just want to complete your collection. Now, a couple other things that I just want to touch on here really quick. Weird will often do this thing where when they have a particular sale or an event going on, they will do a giveaway where if you spend a certain amount of money, usually every $100, you can pick out a specific special edition model to get for free along with your purchase. And usually this is limited to a specific set of models based on availability or whatever is kind of new and hot. But it's nice because it gives you the flexibility to kind of make whatever purchase you want, and then you get this free extra bonus that you're also going to be able to sort of pick from a selection of. It's not just one particular model that you're getting. Sometimes it is one particular model, but they kind of switch it up every once in a while. And I think this is a pretty cool way to do it. It's kind of the best of both worlds because those models are still available to be purchased separately if you just want to buy that one particular thing. But you can also just make some normal purchases and get it thrown in as a free little goodie. So maybe if it's something that it wasn't particularly worth spending the extra $20 on, but you were going to spend $100 on stuff on their website anyway, then you can get that extra model and it can feel pretty cool. I definitely know some people who have gotten together with their friends and sort of combined their orders together, and they ended up getting 2, 3, 4 free models when they made a purchase. And then the last thing on this topic that I wanted to touch on was this new program that Corvus Belli has been doing called Happy Days. And this is where they're making available some of their older and harder to find or event exclusive and out of print models and making them available for people to order again. Now, this is a really cool idea because it gets people excited to get their hands on some of those older models that they may have missed the boat on, or if you're like me, maybe you've only been into the game for 3 or 4 years and they were available long before you ever even played Infinity. And in addition to that, they tend to be some of the more popular or higher demand models, so it can be pretty cool to get your hands on something that you've had your eye on for a really long time, but you didn't want to spend $200-300 on. I'm not really sure what the logistics of something like this look like or how difficult it is for them to actually put those models back into print, but whatever the case may be, Corvus Belli figured out a way to do it, and I think it's really awesome, and I hope they continue doing stuff like that in the future. So I guess in conclusion, I tend to not like when companies do special or limited edition models because as a collector, I tend to like to know that I'm going to be able to get my hands on those things going forward in the future, and I don't like the idea that if I don't buy the thing as soon as it comes out when it's brand new, that I may not be able to get my hands on it again. But at the same time, some of my favorite models in my collection are some of these special editions, and I know they are super popular with other people. So as long as the company handles distributing them right, I think it is a cool idea. And these things give these companies the opportunity to sort of stretch their creative legs and put out some cool and interesting new things that we might not have seen come to their ranges otherwise. So as long as these special edition models don't have their own unique rules, then I think it's probably a good thing overall. But either way, just let me buy the stuff. Don't make me jump through a bunch of hoops to get my hands on a model that I think is cool and I want to give you money for. But anyway, get down in the comments below and let me know what you think makes for a good special edition model, if there's any interesting ways that you've seen companies distribute those models to people, and if you have a favorite special edition model in your collection or one that you have your eyes on for a future purchase. In addition, is there a particularly rare or unique model that has been out of print for a long time that you would like to see that company bring back to a limited release so that people can get their hands on it again? I'm sure there's a ton of stuff like this out there that I'm not even aware of for all sorts of different games, so definitely let me know what your pick would be. Don't forget to enter the giveaway for the Blood and Plunder 2-player starter set. It is a super cool box, and I want to thank Firelock Games for sponsoring this giveaway. And I want to give a huge shout out to the extremely cool kids tier on Patreon, the Steam Barrett Scoundrels, Dogmatize, Devin, and the Spilled Paint Pot. And thanks for watching.